Hello and welcome to this economics content training video produced by the Georgia Department of Education. In this video, we will review standard SSEMI2E that deals with the determinants of supply and how to show them on a supply and demand graph. As shown in the law of supply video, a supply line is upward sloping because there is a direct relationship between the price of a product and the quantity of that product that can and will be produced in the short run. Quantity, in this case, is dependent on price. A higher price likely means higher profits, and this encourages more production. At lower prices, however, producers have less incentive and may not be able to cover their production costs, so the quantity supplied decreases. It turns out that real-life markets have many variables other than price that affect consumers and producers, and therefore supply and demand. While these variables are referred to by different names in different publications, in the Georgia Standards of Excellence we use the word determinants with shifters in parentheses. These variables ultimately determine where the supply line lies on the graph, and changes in the variables can shift that location. Before we go over what the determinants are, let's take a look at how they work. This graph shows the supply for peanuts. Remember that this supply line shows us how many peanuts will be produced at all the possible prices. That's very important. This is all the possible prices, not just one price. So, if peanuts are cheap, farmers do not have much of an incentive to harvest, package, market, and sell. And if peanuts are selling for high prices, well, farmers want to produce more because they should be making more profit. At this point, make sure your students understand that this line is really just a bunch of individual points that represent various quantities sold at various prices. This makes the next step a little bit easier. Let's now assume that the government has decided to provide every peanut farmer in the state with brand new, state-of-the-art peanut shelling technology. This technology can clean and shell peanuts twice as fast as what they're currently doing. Now, every peanut farmer can produce more peanuts regardless of the market price. So, in areas where peanuts are getting a low price, the producers can still provide a higher quantity of them at that low price, and the quantity at that price increases like this. But wait, the same is true at every single price on the line. Farmers charging prices in the middle can also provide more peanuts. And these producers with the really expensive, yep, they can shell twice as many as well. At every possible price, more peanuts are available due to a change in a determinant of the market. What has happened is the entire supply line of peanuts has shifted to the right. This is also known as an increase in supply. This didn't happen because of a change in price, rather a change in a supply determinant. A quick aside here. Always use the words increase, decrease, or right and left when referring to shifts of supply and demand curves. Do not use the words up and down, as this can confuse students, especially with a supply line. Shifting a supply line to the right is an increase, like we did in this graph. However, if looked at incorrectly, it might appear to some students as if the line has actually gone down. It has not. It is shifted to the right. The sooner you get your students using right and left and increase and decrease, the better off they will be. Back to the graph. If I place a demand line on the graph, you can see how this increase in supply, because of the government subsidy, will actually lower the equilibrium price. This is a good time to remind students that not all sellers are charging the equilibrium price. For more on this, watch the video on determining equilibrium price and quantity. Let's look at one more example. Again, we'll use the market for peanuts. This time, however, let's assume that there is a significant, prolonged drought throughout the southern part of Georgia and Alabama. If that is the case, then there will be fewer peanuts available at all the possible prices. Even if you could get a really high price for them, the quantity available will be less, and likely would be coming from storage or imports or possibly some indoor lab somewhere. At the moderate prices, farmers will find it difficult to stay profitable while they look for new irrigation and water storage techniques to deal with the drought. At the lower prices, you likely wouldn't be able to get any peanuts. In this case, an available resource, water, has disappeared, and the supply line shifts to the left, or decreases. Again, stress with students that this happens at all prices, not just one or two prices. The entire market is affected. Showing a demand line on this graph, you notice that the equilibrium price has increased for peanuts. So now we've seen supply lines can shift to the left and to the right. So what are the determinants that affect supply? Well, in reality, there are many of them. But for the Georgia Standards of Excellence, your students are responsible for the following 6. Number 1, changes in costs of productive resources. As resource prices increase, it takes more money to purchase them. This is likely to decrease profits at all price levels. Thus, producers will likely produce a lower quantity at all price levels. On the other hand, cheaper resources means producers have more money with which to invest in production. Number 2, government regulations. In the earlier example in the peanut market, we demonstrated how the government could increase supply by providing new technology to the market. That is an example of a government subsidy. The government was paying for producers to have the ability to produce peanuts for less. Subsidies have a direct relationship with supply. Regulations and taxes, however, have an indirect relationship. If the government increases taxes, for example, well, that reduces profitability and therefore the incentive to produce. An increase in regulations makes production more difficult, time-consuming, and possibly more costly as companies have to work to keep up with the new regulations. This may, at least temporarily, reduce production. Number 3, the number of sellers. This one is pretty straightforward. 5 stores selling milk, for example, will put a higher quantity on the market than 1 store selling milk. The more farmers producing peanuts there are, the more peanuts there are likely to be. The number of sellers is directly related to supply. Number 4, producer expectations. If a producer expects to sell something in the near future, the supply of that item typically increases, and vice versa, regardless of the price. Not a lot of Halloween masks are made available in December, and it's kind of hard to find Valentine's cards in June, for example. However, if there is an item the producer thinks will gain in value over time, and they expect to be able to sell that item at a higher price later on, they may choose to reduce the amount in the market now until the producer feels they can sell it for a higher price. Number 5, technology. Increases in technology typically lowers the production price of an item, and as such, increases the profitability of that good or service and shifts supply to the right. Number 6, education. Just as technology improves physical capital usage in the production process, education improves human capital and increases efficiency while typically reducing waste. The 6 determinants seen here will always shift the entire supply line when present or when they are moved or changed in the form of a question. They are factors other than price that have an impact on the market. One final note that is important. These determinants and their respective relationships with supply operate on the assumption that everything else in the market remains the same. This economic concept is called Ceteris paribus. For simple economic analysis, we assume that only one variable, say number of sellers, is moving at any given time. This may confuse students because in real life, all of the variables are constantly in motion. What a supply and demand graph does is show a picture that freezes the market in place and allows the economist, or student in your case, to analyze individual components of the market. When combined with the determinants of demand, learning these determinants of supply will give students a good working knowledge of how the vast majority of world markets operate.